In this video we're going to have a look at the electron transport chain. So you've already had a look at glycolysis, you've had a look at the Krebs cycle, and we're now at the last stage here in our cellular respiration. So the electron transport chain, well, what is it? Well, it's actually a series of proteins in that inner membrane. Remember we talked about the inner membrane in the mitochondria. And if I just adjust this diagram, we'll just make this a little bit larger. So here in this diagram here, we're looking at the inner membrane here, and here's our proteins here making up our electron transport chain. I will talk about this protein that's over here just in a wee moment. This is an enzyme. Now, you'll remember, or maybe you don't, but just to remind you that you've got hydrogen ions and electrons, and they are attached to your NAD and your FAD. And what happens is your NADH and your FADH2, they transfer the hydrogen ions and electrons to the electron transport chain. So, and the high energy electrons, what they do is they cascade down the electron transport chain, and as they cascade down they release energy. They're being passed, in fact, by electron carriers, and as they're being passed along they're losing their energy as they're travelling along. And that energy, as they are cascading down, that energy that's released from these high energy electrons is used to pump hydrogen ions from the inside of the matrix. So here we've got the inside of the mitochondria, remember that matrix part, and pumping hydrogen ions across that mitochondrial membrane. So we end up with the hydrogen ions all on this part here. Now this is where we are. Here is a space between the membranes, so there's the outer membrane still here on the mitochondria, and here we're talking about the space that's there in between. Now the electrons that are travelling down here, they are actually accepted at the end of that process by oxygen. The hydrogen ions that are here, what happens to them is you end up with a high concentration of them here on this other side of the inner membrane, and they diffuse through an enzyme called ATP synthase. That's this molecule here. Now I'll just move this over so we have a look at this just in a little bit more detail. So here's our enzyme here embedded in the membrane, and the enzyme is called ATP synthase. So here's our enzyme molecule here, ATP synthase. Now you'll see that it's got this kind of design, this rotor design. Now what actually happens is that the hydrogen ions that are building up here, they will diffuse through this ATP synthase, and as they do, the flow of these hydrogen ions, it actually rotates part of the membrane the protein ATP synthase. There's a membrane protein there, and as it rotates, the ATP synthase catalyzes the synthesis of ATP. So make sure you've got in your notes, to summarise, you've got your electrons being passed through your electron transport chain, and finally the electrons combine with oxygen, known as the final electron acceptor. At the same time, the oxygen combines with hydrogen ions to form water. So that means in the absence of oxygen, the electron transport chains just don't operate. It's a major source, and that major source of ATP doesn't become available to the cell. So without oxygen, you've got no citric acid cycle. It cannot function, and the electron transport chain cannot function. You need to have that oxygen there as the final electron acceptor. As these electrons are flowing through these protein complexes. It releases energy for hydrogen to be pumped from inside the matrix to the outside of the matrix, the membrane, the inner membrane, and those hydrogen ions are then diffuse from that high concentration to the low concentration inside the matrix, and in that process they rotate the ATP synthase, and that produces the ATP. And you should remember from your National 5 that in this process you get 36 ATP produced. Well, one of those has come from the citric acid cycle, but you just need to remember that that wouldn't occur if there wasn't oxygen present. So aerobic respiration is said to produce 36 ATP plus the 2 ATP produced from the glycolysis, giving a total of 38 ATP. I will again post some other videos on iTunes U. They will have a bit more than you need again, but it will just help you to give you some sort of deeper understanding that is there. There's an animation that's there. It will probably work in your Puffin app, so you might be able to open up in there because I think it's a Flash based one.